Okay, in today's project I'm replacing the AC compressor on my 99 Saab 93. So to begin, I'd just like to give a little background information on the what models that this would apply to, what other models, as well as why these AC compressors fail, what's the most common reason for having to replace the compressor, and then a quick overview of how the replacement is done on these. So first of all, the 9993 that I have, this process would also apply for all the old generation 93s from 99 through 02 and the 03 convertible. Also very similar would be the new generation 900s that were made from 94 through 98. And also there's a lot of similarity to what I'm going to say that really applies to the old generation 95s as well, that started production in late 98, the 99 production year, up until near the end when they began to produce a new generation 95 right at the end. So of course this wouldn't apply to the V6 that we're talking about, the 4-cylinder here, the standard Saab motor, the 2-liter and the 2.3 liter. Now the reason that the AC compressor needs to be replaced on my car, and which is also the most common failure item on these compressors, is the bearing for the compressor clutch goes, and then you'll start to get a noise, and then eventually, you know, you could throw your belt when that seizes up, because what will happen, at first you'll get some noise, then it'll start to wobble. The pulley will start wobbling severely eventually, and that's really the most common failure on these. The compressors themselves, I've rarely had to ever replace one for a failure, say internally. It rarely happens. Almost all the time you'll have to replace it for the clutch. Now, I noticed on eBay now you can get, I think in the early times, I don't know if there really was a replacement clutch available, but I see there is now. But the price on them, the prices have come down quite a bit on these compressors. I got this aftermarket one for a little over $100, and what they're asking for on the clutch itself was something like $90 or so. So the difference was just negligible. So I'd rather just go ahead and not mess with the clutch and change the compressor. But now I am going to investigate when I take the old one off. I've never actually changed a clutch on one of these. I'm going to see if it's simply a matter of taking the bolt out and pulling it off, in which case you could actually maybe do this on the car. But over the years, I've seen many times changing the clutch on a compressor is not that simple. You may need a puller and things like that, and so it can be a little more involved. So I'll see on these, because it may be if you're having this problem and your AC system is still good, your AC works, and you could change this clutch on the car without having to evacuate the refrigerant or take the compressor off. That would be the way to go. So at the end of the video, I'm going to take my old compressor and investigate a little bit, pull the clutch off it, and see. So that's the why they need to be changed. Most often it's a failure with the bearing on the clutch there. The how-to, you'll notice there's this is actually a hanger on the mount on the engine. There's a little hanger, and then this will just sit on it. And it basically is all it is to hold the compressor in place when you there's just 3 long bolts here that hold it on. So basically to change this, most of the work you're going to be doing is you'll be under the right front of the car. You'll have to pull the inner fender liner back. There's some more shields and things under there. Also the oil cooler lines are in the way, but You don't have to disconnect those. You're just gonna have to work around them. It's a little tight under there, but so most of the work you'll be doing is under the car, right in front of the car. As the compressor sits on the lower left-hand side of the engine, and so you're gonna have to take it out the bottom. You only do a little work from the top. You're going to take your belt off from the top. You're going to have to take your line off from the top. You can run a long extension down and take the 13mm bolt out and pull the lines off the top. But most of the work you're going to be doing under the car. And so really all that holds it on is these 3 long bolts. Hangs on here, and you've got your wire. So that's just the basic quick run through of what models I'll be talking about in this video, why the compressors need to be replaced most often, and the quick how-to or overview on how to do it. So what I'd like to do right now is I'm going to run the car and see if I can get you to hear the noise, because it may help you in diagnosing your car. There's a number of things that can make a noise in the belt area. Fairly frequently on these cars, when the water pump goes, it can go where it's not even leaking, but the bearing on the water pump goes, and you can also get a rattle where the pulley can actually, there's not much clearance, it can start hitting the front cover. And so you have to be able to distinguish between the sounds to isolate what noise you're getting in the belt area of the car. And then there's an idler pulley, which is a common failure on these as well. And even the alternator can go, and that makes a different sound when the bearing on the alternator goes. So let's go to that now. I'll run the car and see if we can get a good pickup on the noise that this makes when the clutch fails on these. Okay, we're gonna have to listen for a minute to pick it up, because it'll come and go. I've got the car in drive to put a load on it. So let's take a listen. It's just doing it faintly now. The sound will come and go. I think you might have been able to pick it up there. It did it loudly a couple times. But basically, it's the sound of the pulley's wobbling, and then it's interfering with the clutch on the compressor there, and it'll make that noise. It'll set up that vibration. So let's go start on our project for today. Now, anytime you take a belt off a car where you're not familiar with it, is a nice idea to just make up a little diagram, because you may think you'll remember how it goes on, but you can be surprised you just might not when the time comes to put it back together again. Now, I've done these so many times over the years, I know exactly how the belts run, but I did this so you could see, because I also wanted to explain something that can also be done. What I did, actually, I even did it on this car for a while when the AC compressor first started making noise, is I got a shorter belt that basically ran across here. So the AC compressor is down here, come over the water pump and bypass the compressor. But what I found, I really didn't like that, because when you would have it in drive, the belt tended to set up a bit of a vibration, and I think it put extra stress on the water pump, the way this was routed. It's just kind of my feeling on it, I don't know, but I think the way when you eliminate the AC compressor, I think it puts a little more stress on this water pump bearing. It's not as evenly distributed on there, and it may lead to the bearing failing on the water pump. But that is an option. You can run a shorter belt if if you don't care about the AC. The AC is not working. So anyways, here's your belt diagram. Just make a little diagram, draw your little pulleys, and draw the belt around the pulleys, and make it much easier when you go to put it back together again. Now actually, I'm not going to take even the belt all the way off. I'll just kind of move it out of the way here from the compressor when I do this. So let's go take a look at what's involved with taking the belt loose on the car. Here's the part number for the Napa belt that I used, which may help you if you decide to, or even as a temporary fix, if you want to just put a shorter belt on there until you figure out what you're going to do with your compressor. Here's the part number for a Napa belt that will fit. Okay, to release the tension on the belt, you'll look down at the tensioner, and you can take a 1/2 inch extension and make sure I've seen people crack these. You see the receptacle there? Because actually Saab has a special tool that fits that perfectly, and that's angled. You can put it in there. But a half inch bar is what most people have, and that'll work. But make sure it's fully. Sometimes you'll get like crud and stuff in that hole, and you may not really have it fully seated. And then when you go to put leverage on it, it's actually, I've seen it happen many times. I've seen people crack these, break the ear off on it, and then you've got no way to grab. There's quite a bit of tension on a tensioner. There's no way to really move that easily once that's broken, and they're fairly expensive. So anyways, get that seated down there, and then what you want, you can use an Allen wrench. This is actually a little tool that comes like on a new tensioner, because they when it comes, it's actually in the tensioner. So you take the tension off. There's a little hole that you can slide this in. You'll see it's pretty self-explanatory. So you'll move your bar back and then take your tension off the belt. There's your tensioner down there. Now one thing, just mention briefly here, this top idler pulley that's right above the tensioner here. It's extremely common failure item on these Saabs. I'd say they go about every 60,000 miles because they're just a sealed bearing, and they'll go. I've seen them go many times without any warning. They won't even start making noise first many times, and they'll fail and they can leave you stranded. And they're not very expensive, and they're very easy to change. So what I do, any Saab I get, if I don't have a service record of when this was changed, I'll just go ahead and change it immediately when I get the car, rather than have a failure and get stranded. So just a recommendation there. If you don't know when that was changed, go ahead and put a new one on. Now you're going to want to discharge your AC system, and the proper way to do it is to use a vacuum pump and have it evacuated. And if you don't have the equipment for that, you can take it somewhere and have them do it. If your system is old and there's no longer any refrigerant in it, and you're just changing the AC compressor, then you don't have to worry about it. You can very carefully check it by just you take off your cap and just give a little press on there on the valve. Of course, using all safety precautions and goggles, and because there'll be quite a bit of pressure in there if it's full, so you don't hurt yourself. So now mine, originally my AC was working a few years ago when the compressor first started making noise, but it's discharged over time because just now I took a screwdriver and there was a tiny little bit of pressure in there in the system. And so what I'll do when I go to recharge it is I'll put some dye in there. It's fairly inexpensive. You can get a dye kit. Comes with special goggles, and the light, and it'll show up. I've found that over the years that's the best way to find a leak, because unless it's a real big one and you can actually, as you start to put the refrigerant in and you can hear it or something, the sniffers that they made, I've found that they can be a real pain to use and highly inaccurate. But most of the time when you have an AC leak, it can be a smaller leak, seeping from somewhere, and that if you charge it and drive it for a few weeks, it'll seep out, and then you can use that dye and locate your leak. So I always advise, when you recharge these, put some of that dye in there. And the common failure on these systems as far as a leak, there's a couple hoses down here under the radiator, and those are common failure item on these. I mean, anything else could leak too, but like your condensers usually don't go. Your evaporators hold up pretty good, but here and there they'll go. Most of the time there's a couple hoses that'll fail on these, that'll leak. So anyways, the other thing I would, as far as discharging it, before you take your line off, it's kind of hard to see down here. Get a light. Down there between the you see the radiator hose, the lower radiator hose attaching to the water pump there on your left, and on the right you'll see an AC hose. Well, that's right down there next to it is that 13mm bolt. You just take an extension, you'll take that bolt out, and then you can pull up on it. But I recommend leaving it sealed up until right at the end, that way it's never a good idea to leave these open to the air for an extended period of time. So I like to open it up at the last minute before changing the compressor. So I'll save that for last. So now I'm going to go under the car and get everything loose and ready to take the compressor out. Now I went ahead and took the wheel off. You're going to want to do that, and just for ease of working on it, you could try to work your way around it, but take the wheel off, jack it up. Now I put 2 jack stands under it. You want to be safe. Don't ever take a chance with your life, because you're going to be laying on your back working under this right front corner of the car. And so I went ahead and put 2 jack stands under the subframe on the front here. Now first thing you're going to do, there's this shield here is a belt protector. Pretty self-explanatory, that comes off. It's also, most of them are 8mm. There's a 10mm here that goes through a little clip to your inner fender well here. Now, it's up to you. You could take the whole thing off, or what I'm going to do is just take the lower front part of it loose and peel it back out of the way. If it starts to aggravate me or be in my way, then I might go ahead and take the whole thing off. The only thing is, you see this plastic 10mm nut, it goes on a little stud that's welded to the body there. And I've found over the years, any car from up north where you get some salt or anything, 9 times out of 10, even though it's plastic, you go to take that off, it'll snap the stud off. You may be able to spray it up, get a little something on it, but it's very likely that could break off. You can always drill a hole and just reattach it there with a screw, so it's no real big deal. But anyways, there's this belt shield, the fender liner, and then underneath here you've got a front splash shield. So I'm going to go ahead and take those 3 shields off and see what kind of access we have to the compressor. Now I just wanted to show you something. The power feed for the compressor is behind the headlight. You can actually get at it without taking the headlight out, but it only takes 2 minutes to take the headlight out. And if everything's secured as it originally was from the factory, you're going to find you might want to do that, because the wire also has a little push pin here that secures it to your radiator, which is hard to get at. So just pop the headlight out, and then you can get at your power feed wire here. And then when you put your new one in, it'll be easy to route the wire up here the way it's supposed to, out of the way, so it doesn't interfere with the belt or anything. So just a little tip there. Don't mess around with it. Just take the headlight out, and it's a lot easier to access it. Now with the shields out of the way, you can see the compressor. You've got these oil cooler lines that'll be kind of in the way, but you'll find once you get the compressor out, you can just gently bend these down. You'll be able to pull the compressor out. Just wanted to show you the pulley here. I can actually, you can hear it there, the rumble. And then if you can hear the little waka waka waka, you don't see a whole lot of visible movement there unless you look closely, but that's what it is. It's rocking back and forth here, setting up that noise. So that's the problem. So here you can see one of your, I believe these are 17mm, if my memory serves me right. There's 3 of these you've got to get out, and I don't remember which ones, but perhaps this is one of the ones where you actually don't have clearance to take it all the way out because they're long. So what you have to do is take them loose and then leave them in the compressor itself. And but you'll see as you go to take the 3 out, I'm going to access the other 2. I believe the top one toward the left side of the car I can get from the top. I'll reach down by the radiator and get it. The upper one on this side I can probably get right through the opening here, and this one here is easy on the bottom. So I'm going to get those loose, but before I go too far, then I'll have to disconnect my AC line from the top. And then once we've got everything loose, the long bolts that I can slide all the way out while it's in here, I'll go ahead and slide them out just so I'm not having to mess with them. But then you'll have to remember which ones that you had to leave in here and pop them in the new compressor. The most awkward thing with it will be hanging the compressor on the hook. Sometimes that can be awkward, but once it's hung up on there, then it's easy enough to get the bolts started. In case the setup, I use a long extension here to remove the 13mm bolt for the where the hose is attached on the top of the compressor. There's not really much you can do once you take it loose. That's part of the hassle of this job. That hose assembly is just going to hang there above the compressor, and so when you put the new one in there and hang it on that hook, you're going to want to make absolutely sure that the O-rings on the compressor don't become dislodged before, because there's not much clearance, so you just got to kind of play with it. But you've got to be aware, and I'll even take a mirror and look up in there and make sure the O-rings haven't moved, that they're still in their receptacles when you're going to set the hose back on there. And it's just the one 13mm bolt that holds it down, but you got to get everything lined up just right and before you snug it up. Here's the wire connector that I was just showing you. I sprayed it up a little WD-40 because it's a little tight to get out. I pulled the wire through here and so your new one, make sure this has got tension, snug that up and click it on there, and then push it in back in and it'll lock in here. And then if you want, you can transfer this little wire tie and clip, and it pops in a hole in the radiator there. Okay, another tip, end up taking this air intake hose out of here to get a little more access from the top for the one bolt here. And there's another reason for taking out the headlight, because I found that you can actually stick your arm through the headlight opening and help you get access to removing the bolts on the compressor here. So just another tip there. I always find that anything that's not hard to remove and gives you a little more room, a little more visibility, go ahead and take it and get it out of the way. Okay, there's your first bolt. Boy, I guess maybe because it dried out, but it was extremely tight. In fact, what I had to do is, well, first of all, I like to use a spark plug style ratchet, because these bolts have a little angle to them, and a straight ratchet may not do it. But you got to make sure you got it perfectly seated on there. And then for leverage to actually break it free, I actually had to take my long wrench here and stick it on my ratchet. And just a correction, earlier I had mentioned, I thought I remember these being 17, but they're 16mm heads on here. So this one actually came all the way out. There's enough room between the compressor and the radiator that you can take it all the way out. Okay, a combination of the other top bolt, I went ahead and got it from the top. There really wasn't room to reach up from the bottom to get at it. I got it from the top. Again, another reason to remove the headlight, because I found myself with one arm going through the headlight opening, and you'll find a little opening, you can get your hand in there. And then I had to put my spark plug ratchet on it from the top, and it was extremely tight. Again, I think it dried out. I'll put a little lube on these when I go to reinstall them. But for leverage, I really needed that extra 1.5 feet so leverage on my ratchet to get that loose. Very tight. And so I've got the two top bolts out, and the bottom one I started to loosen, and that's the one I was trying to remember earlier. Now that is the one that on this particular model has to stay in the compressor. So when you go to put the new compressor in, you'll have to put that long bolt in the bottom. There's just the three, two on the top, one on the bottom. The one on the bottom is the one that you're going to have to put the bolt in the new compressor before you slide it back up in there, because there'll be no room to put the bolt into it. But these other top two, it's no problem. You can finagle it, reach down there and get them in there. Okay, I've got it out, and basically what I'm showing you here is I'm taking it over the top of the cooler lines for the oil. You gotta kind of twist it and finagle and get out of there. And but what I really want to that's not really a big deal. What the big deal is, I remember on these now, there's a clearance problem with this hook. What I ran into, let me show you. It's really what makes this job a pain. You know, you can see up there, see if I can point. This hook here, well, when you're hanging the compressor on there, you see how little clearance is with the water pump there. And the problem you have, see your AC line here, see when I press up it hits the bottom of the hose there on the pump. And so you're running into a clearance problem. To actually get it off the hook, first of all, it's got to be an absolute straight shot. And actually with this one, because of the clearance problem here, I actually had to take my pry bar and give it a little pry under here, and with it, which I knew would happen, but it's no big deal. But let's see. If you look up here, see the hanger, I just broke it to get it off. But you see how on the top you've got your O-rings, and there's just no clearance. So I'm thinking, because what I've done before, I only remember doing it one other time, which you know my car is going to be the same way. But on one car, to get it back in, I just ground an opening on the hanger, you know, on the new compressor, so that I could get it in there. Because really the hanger is just for theoretically your convenience, just to hang it on there because it's heavy, and then you can thread your bolts in. But then that hanger, in this case, ends up, it may even be like assembly on the assembly line, you know, they hang it on there. But in any case, it's a problem for me now because the clearance is really just not there. You know, when I push up on the hose snorkel there, there's not enough clearance. So what the problem I'm going to run into is the reverse of when I went to take it out. You know, I'll go to try to hang it on there, and I won't be able to get it on the hanger because I'll be pressing up against the hoses there, and then you risk messing up your new O-rings, and they're in there pretty snug, but you know, popping them out. And you know, I really hate to do it because it gets messy, and then you're under here. But I'll gain some clearance on the bottom of that water pump. This would be a whole lot easier. I changed this water pump, you know, like a year ago or something. This would have been a lot easier to do when the water pump was out. But anyways, I'll gain probably enough clearance by taking off that lower radiator hose off of the coolant pump. You know, but what a mess. It'll just keep dripping. The antifreeze will be dripping down here while you're, you know, I hate to do that. So I'm kind of wrestling with the thought of grinding the hanger on the new compressor and seeing if I can slip it in there. But just from experience, I know even then it's going to be tight, and I'll be fighting against that hose up there, you know, the AC hose at the same time. So I'm going to give that some thought, whether I'm going to, I don't even think I'll put the new one up in there without grinding it if I go that route, because I just know there's not enough clearance. I couldn't get the old one off. There's just no room. So I think what I'm faced with is either grind the hanger on the new one, or go ahead and bite the bullet and, you know, drain the coolant, take that hose off, and deal with the drips and stuff. And even then, you know, this is what I hate. It'll still be tight, but gaining that extra clearance with the hose off of there and the clamp and the hose out of the way, I should be able to hang the new one without grinding it. And so let's see. I'm going to give it a little thought. Alright, I made up my mind. I'm going to give it a shot with the grinding it and see if I can leave the cooling system sealed up. Here you can clearly see how it broke off there. So it shows you. So I know from experience I had it perfectly lined up. Because if you tilt this or get it rocked, you're not going to get it off either. It's got to come straight. You've got to go up off the little ball and then straight out. And because of the clearance problem here, with the snorkel hitting the water pump, I wasn't getting any up. I mean, not really nothing up. So I couldn't, you got to go up maybe, oh, I don't know, between 1/8 and 1 1/4 of an inch maybe, up and over. And then you're dealing too with the recesses on here. The snorkel has about an 1/8 inch part that goes down in these holes, which you don't want to damage either, And so going back in, you're still going to be dealing with the O-rings and that. So basically, it's got to go up, and that's got to go in at the same time. So it really is. That's really the most unpleasant part of the whole job. It's a nuisance. So, anyways, I know I'm still going to have to wrestle with it, even doing it this way. But the only thing is, even draining the cooling system, short of taking off the coolant pump, by taking the hose off, I'm going to gain. I may gain 1/8 of an inch, where the snorkel can rise up, and I may be able to hang it. Maybe, it's an if. So I'm just gonna take my grinding wheel, and I'm gonna open this up, and I'm gonna give it a shot that way and see if I can, put it in there. Finagle with lining this up with the hose, and then you got to get your 3 bolts started. I'm gonna lube those up, so they can get started in the threads right. So that's my next step. So I'm gonna go ahead and grind this and go wrestle with it for a while, and I'll get back, let you know how it goes. So there it is. Just opened it up nicely. I'm gonna give it a shot. And just one other thing I wanted to show you before I went to put this in: the power wire is nearly as long as the factory one. So while it's going to reach, I'm not going to be able to put it, in the original location. So I know this. I can get this to reach because I can, I can move this end here. Just have to make sure it's out of the way. It's one of those things you're dealing with, aftermarket. A little shorter wire. Anyways, here it goes. Just a couple other things before I go for it here. I went ahead and the cover for here, I went ahead and put it on my old one because this compressor was still working, and if I decide at some point to replace the clutch on here, I've still got a compressor that'll work. So anyway, sealed that up. But now these O-rings here, they're just sitting in here very loose. I mean, they're just going to fall right out when I go try to put it in there. They're not anywhere near as snug as the other ones. So I'm going to take a little Permatex gasket stuff here that has some it stays tacky, and it's going to maybe help these stay in here, because I know that's just going to fall out as soon as I start wrestling with this, and there's no room to put them back in. So I'm going to have to glue that in there some way. What I have done in the past with things like this, if I had enough time, but I don't want to, is could actually take some RTV and let it dry some, smooth it off so you still have your O-ring contact. That'll keep them in there. I'm going to try this, see if I can get this up in there. And like I said earlier, I'll double check. I'll put a mirror up in there, make absolutely sure that I've got my O-rings, that they haven't become dislodged in the process of wrestling with this thing. Yeah, I keep thinking of things. Need to mention this now. You tilt this a fair amount to get it up over the hose. You just got to be careful not to tilt it too much, because there's oil in this compressor. You know, there's a fair amount of oil in this compressor, and you're going to spill it out the holes. So any little tip like that can save you some frustration. And the same reverse when you're taking the old one out. If you tilt it too far, you could get some oil on yourself. You know, it'll pour out of here. So as I go to put this up in there, I'm just conscious of that. I can tilt it, but I can't like get crazy and tilt it too far, and then the oil will come out. Well, good news, everybody. I'm quite relieved it worked, and it really wasn't that bad. Little piece of wood, kind of like my substitute hanger here, because it's very awkward to work with. It's heavy, and again, you're trying to line up, get these bolts started at the same time, that you don't knock your O-rings off on the top, and that you line up your snorkel on the top. So what I did is, I braced it with the piece of wood here, and then I started this bottom one, lined it up and started this bottom one, just, a few threads. I got it in a few threads, because I know that's going to help me then line up the top and get the weight off it. So that's how I got it started. Now let me go up top and show you. So a big thing before I got too carried away, I started my 2 long bolts on the top, but at the same time I had to be very careful that I could get the top AC lines, where they attach there, started. Because it's just the one bolt, the 13mm head bolt. You don't want to cross thread it. You've got to get it in there. And then again, you have to make sure that as I mentioned, that the O-rings don't come loose. So I use my mechanics mirror. You just got to be patient. Take your time. So, I made sure that my O-rings were seated still. And then, procedure I've always liked to do with cars is keep everything kind of loose. Don't tighten anything up first. Get everything started. So I got my bolt here started. And there's a tip with this. The end of this is a wobbly. Old snap-on extensions I have a set with the wobble on the end, and it gives you just the perfect angle, because you're going to find that going down through here, a straight shot isn't going to work. And so I love using those. So that works great. Got that started, and I just left this wrench in here just to show you. I've actually snugged everything up. But again, the spark plug style wrench, I love this snap-on, because you got these angles to deal with. This way you can get the socket on there square and get good leverage. So I snugged everything up. I've got the 3 mounting bolts in. I've got my AC line connected. And now it's just basically a matter of pretty much the stuff I explained and showed you in the beginning, putting everything back together, connecting up my power feed wire, putting all my, the belt back on, all my shields back on. But all that's pretty straightforward once you've taken it apart. The hard part's done. The one thing that really hangs you up, and it's a struggle. And so, again, this is a lesson learned. I've only had to do this one other time, and over the years putting compressors in these cars, and I've known them to be tight. And so this was a case where my preemptively just going ahead and grinding off the hanger really gave me enough room. And you're dealing with maybe, I might have had 1/8 of an inch to deal with there, but it gave me just enough by not having to get over the hump on that hanger. So I'm going to button it all back up, and then, like I mentioned, I'm going to touch base again at the end. I'm going to see about what's involved with taking the compressor clutch off the old compressor, and see if that might be a route to go. So I'll touch base. Now this is the way it is with cars. There's always one more thing. So I mentioned how the power feed line on the replacement aftermarket compressor was shorter, so I've got it plugged in, and what I've had to do to get a little more, so just so there's not tension on that, you know, when the engine's running and the engine rocks, I pulled these out of their normal receptacles. This was up here, this was over here, and it's just too tight. You know, I could splice a wire or something, but I've just pulled these out and laid them down here to get a little more. You know, these are going to be alright. They're not going to chafe or anything. I'm just going to lay it here. It'll give it a little more slack. But while I was doing that, I noticed that this power steering line here the way it's designed, it naturally tends to rub here. They've even, from the factory, this is actually a factory piece of rubber that they put on the steel here just to give it the, you know, a little extra protection on the line. But I noticed that the hose here, this power steering hose, was starting to chafe right through this and through the lining on the hose. So what I did here, this is a piece of heater hose that I just split and put on there, and I've got a wire tie, and I'm just going to wire tie that on there and protect that hose. So eventually it would chafe through when you got a big power steering leak. So it's just one more thing, you know, as long as I'm here, I noticed it while I was fooling with this power feed wire. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. These little tips can save you a lot of trouble. Okay, I told you I'd look into the compressor clutch, and it turns out I think pretty much this is something that isn't that hard, and if you have the right tools you could do it right on the car, in which case you could save having to change the compressor, you know, evacuating the system and changing the compressor. You could just change the clutch. I'll just show you a few things. The clutch plate is held on by a 14mm nut. There's a little washer behind it. You'll find that it's good. You can just take an impact and bump it off, and because it's recessed a little bit in here, you're going to need a thinner wall socket so that you get all the way on the nut. So I just gave a little bump. That came right off. Then the part that's the problem, it's not this bearing here on the compressor itself. That's fine, but where the play was and the noise, the bearing that's right here in the pulley is bad, and that's where the noise and the play is coming from. And this is just held on by, there's a C-clamp. So you take that off. There's a little ridge here. You take that C-clamp off, and then you can pull this off. Now I found that I needed to tap it some to get it off. It was stuck on a little bit, but not bad. So it's probably something, if you can get something behind it when it's on the car and tap. Probably just have to be patient, tap with it, and then you can maybe pry a little bit and get it off. But it's not pressed or anything, so that will come off. Now, if you're going to go ahead and change this part of the clutch assembly too, I don't know if you can see in there, there's a light. You can see down in there. See, there's another C-clamp. So to do it, you're gonna need a good set of proper pliers to get these off. And this one's pretty deep, so you'll need, you know, a longer one. And I found with this one too, you'll just need a good set especially to be able to do it on the car. You know, you're a little bit of room there. But I'd say my conclusion on that is quite doable. And like I said, the issue was, one of the issues was that the price on these is fairly steep, and you get up close to the price of what the compressors cost now. But the other side of it is, if you've got a good original equipment compressor, and like I mentioned earlier, these don't fail really very often. You know, they're good quality compressors that Saab put on there originally. So I'm thinking, in most cases, the way to go would be to leave the compressor on the car and go ahead and change this clutch, because this is by far and away the major failure item on these compressors. This bearing just goes, and that was the problem with mine here. So that's about it. I hope this video has been helpful to you. I think that if you run into this problem with the noisy bearing on the compressor clutch, that you should be able to change that right on the car and not have to change your compressor. And that would be the way to go, as long as your compressor is still working good. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. And that was our project for today.